Hello, welcome to Ex-Witness Awake. I am your currently sick host, Jonathan. Last week we covered wars as part of the composite sign of the last days. Today I'm all in with sickness and pestilence as the subject of today's video. So drop me a like for climbing out of bed and hanging out in front of the green screen with you fine folks. Okay, let's get into it. Introduction. Pestilence. It's been foretold that there would be increased reports of sickness throughout the world during the time of the end. Last week I played Stephen Lett talking about the last days of the last days, and I'll spare you that this time. In his talk, he was discussing the pandemic of the last couple of years. As of December the 1st, 2022, 6.63 million people have died worldwide from COVID-19. So surely Stephen Lett is onto something with his declaring the last of the last days. But wait, I seem to remember a few other pandemics in human history. Similar to wars, you get a few people together, especially with poor sanitation and nutrition, and things happen. In this case, you get the spread of communicable diseases. Example number 1, the Spanish flu. In the interest of giving out accurate information, the following information is taken directly from the Center for Disease Control webpage. The 1918 influenza pandemic was the most severe pandemic in recent history. It was caused by an H1N1 virus with genes of avian origin. Although there is not universal consensus regarding where the virus originated, it spread worldwide between 1918 and 1919. In the United States, it was first identified in military personnel in spring 1918. It is estimated that about 500 million people, or 1/3 of the world's population, became infected with the virus. The number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, with about 675,000 occurring in the United States. Mortality was high in people younger than 5 years old, 20 to 40 years old, and 65 years and older. The high mortality rate in healthy people, including those in the 20 to 40 year age group, was a unique feature of this pandemic. While the 1918 H1N1 virus has been synthesized and evaluated, the properties that made it so devastating are not well understood. With no vaccine to protect against influenza infection and no antibiotics to treat secondary bacterial infections that can be associated with influenza infections, control efforts worldwide were limited to non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, use of disinfectants, and limitations of public gatherings, which were applied unevenly. So while cases and unfortunately deaths from COVID are no joke, 6.63 million is significantly less than the estimated 50 million of the 1918 pandemic. But wait, some might argue, wouldn't the 20th century be part of the end times anyway? True, that pandemic happened during a time that some are still alive to talk about it. So let's go further back in history to a time less modern. So let's talk plague. The following information is found at history.com, where it talks about 3 of the deadliest pandemics in recorded history caused by a single bacterium, Yersinia pestis, a fatal infection otherwise known as the plague. The first was the plague of Justinian, and it arrived in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, in 541 CE. It was carried over the Mediterranean Sea from Egypt, where plague-ridden fleas hitched a ride on the back of rats that snacked on grain. The plague decimated Constantinople and spread like wildfire across Europe, Asia, North Africa, and Arabia, killing an estimated 30 to 50 million people, perhaps half of the world's population. 800 years later, the plague returned, and it killed with reckless abandon. The Black Death, which hit Europe in 1347, claimed an astonishing 25 million lives in just 4 years. Some historians estimate the disease led to even higher death tolls, up to 200 million. So, how did people stop the disease at that time? Well, they didn't really stop it, but they tried their best. This is when really the first time that quarantines happened. You may recall that there was a few cruise ships during the beginning of COVID that people had to stay on those ships for a certain number of days. Well, in this port city, they used to require that sailors stay on their ships for 30 days as a practice to avoid spreading infection. But eventually, they changed that to 40 days, or a quarantino, the origin of the word quarantine and the start of its practice in the Western world. The third plague outbreak that is mentioned at history.com is that of the Plague of London. London never really caught a break after the Black Death. The plague resurfaced roughly every 10 years from 1348 to 1665. 40 outbreaks in just over 300 years. And with each new plague epidemic, 20% of men, women, and children living in the British capital were killed. It mentions that by the early 1500s, England imposed the first laws to separate and isolate the sick. Homes that were stricken by plague were marked with a bale of hay strung to a pole outside. And if you had infected family members, you had to carry a white pole when you went out in public. Cats and dogs were believed to carry the disease, so there was a massacre of hundreds of thousands of animals. The Great Plague of 1665 was the last and one of the worst centuries-long outbreaks, killing 100,000 Londoners in just 7 months. All public entertainment was banned, and victims were forcibly shut into their homes to prevent the spread of the disease. Red crosses were painted on their doors, along with a plea for forgiveness. Lord, have mercy upon us. So this feels very familiar, doesn't it? Entertainment being banned and being told to stay in your home. So it's not something new. Another terrible disease that once plagued the world was that of smallpox. It was epidemic to Europe, Asia, and Arabia for centuries, a persistent menace that killed 3 out of 10 people it infected and left the rest with pockmarked scars. But that death rate was nothing compared to what happened to the native populations of the New World, because the people of the New World, the indigenous peoples of modern-day Mexico and the United States, had zero natural immunity to smallpox, so the virus cut them down by the tens of millions. It's thought that 90 to 95% of the indigenous population was wiped out over a century. Mexico went from 11 million people pre-conquest to 1 million. Thankfully, through efforts of the worldwide community, smallpox was eradicated in the 1970s. In the early to mid-19th century, cholera tore through England, killing tens of thousands. The prevailing scientific theory of the day said that the disease was spread by foul air known as miasma. But a British doctor named John Snow suspected that the mysterious disease, which killed its victims within days of first symptoms, lurked in London's drinking water. Snow acted like a scientific Sherlock Holmes, investigating hospital records and morgue reports to track the precise locations of deadly outbreaks. He created a geographic chart of cholera deaths over a 10-day period and found a cluster of 500 fatal infections surrounding the Broad Street pump, a popular city well for drinking. He had the handle removed, and wouldn't you know it, the infections rapidly died down. So, we've talked about a lot of people dying from a lot of disease, and this is definitely not what would be considered in our modern day. Not what we'd be considering the end times. So to say that there would be reports of war and reports of disease and other things, again, you have to think, is this the only time we've had these things happen? Does it prove that we're in the end times? Not necessarily. So just remember, when you are thinking about this composite sign of the times, to really think about it and weigh it out. And just don't accept that what you hear from religious leaders is the truth. So, let's go with another one. How about earthquakes? Let's do earthquakes next. I thank you for watching. I hope that this has been somewhat interesting, and that you will please like and share and subscribe, and I will catch you next time. And hopefully I won't sound like a croaking frog, and I will feel better. So, bye for now. Hello, welcome to But wait, some might argue, wouldn't the 20th century be part of the end times anyway? True, that pandemic happened during a time that some are still alive to talk about it. So let's go farther back in history to a time less modern. Damn it. So while cases and unfortunately death from COVID are no joke, 6.63 million is significantly less than